Hello, Mr. Lang. Thank you for taking the time and meeting with the Canadian Polish Historical Society and then agreeing to share a little bit about your family history, particularly your parents' history and how they arrived in Canada, and your esteemed history in Edmonton and Alberta's Polonia, and now particularly as president of the Stowarzyszenie Combatantów, the Polish Combatants Association. I know you speak Polish extremely well, so feel free to switch from Polish to English, but I have a million questions for you, and I really want to hear the exciting story. I had the honor and pleasure of knowing your mom and dad, who unfortunately are no longer with us, but they were such pillars of our Polish community, and so are you now, and it's important to record that spoken history in posterity, so that people not only in Alberta, but this will be posted throughout the world, so people know what great work and what amazing patriotic Polish people we have and had in our community, and how this Polish community was built in Alberta. So thank you for taking the time and doing it.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to come onto the program and give you as much information as I possibly could. I'm happy to be here, and I'll be happy to convey any information that you need from me.
We're honored to have you. So, you know what, let's start as far back as we can. I was looking with amazement at some of the pictures that you have shared with us of your dad's military history with the Polish forces, Polish army, and then later your mom's arrival. But one thing that really captured my my attention is your dad's brief biography, and it says from Poland to Russia, then to Persia, then to Iraq, then to Palestine, then to Egypt, then to Sicily and Palermo in Italy, then to Rome and the famous Battle of Monte Cassino just on the way to Rome, Bologna, Scotland, Glasgow, England, Canada, Montreal, and then of all places, the most important place in the world, Rosebud, Alberta.
Yes, well known for its dinner theater.
Exactly. So let's start. Let's talk about your dad first.
Okay.
Where was he from? What brought him all the way here?
I wish I could pronounce it. It was Rożanka, Poland, which was close to Lwów.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he was when he was taken away from there by the Russians. And he was on one of the first transports out of Poland to Siberia with his mother and his brother Victor.
So what was he doing in Rożanka prior to the deportation?
Farming, yeah. Dad, he was the youngest of 15.
Mm-hmm.
And so when his dad passed away, which was, I believe he was 3 years old at the time, his education didn't go far because they needed people to work on the farm. His mother was fairly old at that time, and well, managed to have a baby, but you know, she was fairly old. And and Victor, which was 3 years older than my dad, was the second youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically stayed on a farm and did the farming until they were shipped out.
Mm-hmm.
Until they were taken as the bourgeoisie, or whatever the Russians landowners, which was despised by the Russians.
That's right.
Yeah.
So did he share with you what was the moment of deportation and where they arrived? What was that all about?
He shared some of it. I can't remember all of it,
mm-hmm.
but it is in his history. He wrote it pretty thoroughly. But yeah, they shipped them out, and he was telling me the troubles they had on the train because they packed people in like cattle.
Yes.
You know, a little hole in the middle of the floor for a washroom, and he said people passed away, and they just, you know, the Russians will come up and throw them off the train, just leave them where they stopped. You know, and he told me a little bit of history there when they it was I can't pronounce it where he was in Russia, but he was actually, when he was there, he was young, and they put him in charge of keeping track of all the people in the camp.
Okay.
And unfortunately for him, one of the girls that was there had a boyfriend at one of the camps that was about 5 kilometers away, so she took off.
Okay.
And she went to him, and when they did the roll call in the morning,
he was missing one person.
He was missing one person. Well, he was to blame. So Dad told me about his epic run behind a horse. He was tied by his hands and run to the camp commander, which was, I believe, a few kilometers away. And when he got there, the Russian commander just put his pistol on the desk and he says, "That's it, you're done." And they took him out and they were about to shoot him. Then I guess the commander thought better of it and then ran him back to the camp. But that was one scary point. They were cutting, my uncle also added to that they were in the bush cutting trees down. You know, that's what their job was out there. And he says they treat us like hogs, he said, because all they gave you was a spoon, like a wooden spoon that you kept in the heel of your boot, and they poured the food into a trough that everyone had to eat out of. You know, so that was kind of disgusting, but I mean, you know, you understood. Dad also suffered from lack of iron, so he kind of went blind. And the way they brought his eyesight back was that they managed to get a hold of a piece of liver. And what they did was they steamed it every night, and Dad would have his head under a towel, breathing and the fumes from this steamed liver, and eventually his eyesight returned.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. So, and that was that until they managed to get out. They were enlisted into when Anders had the army called up everyone into the army. He was lucky enough to be accepted with my uncle.
And that's when they would have migrated all the way from Siberia down into Persia, where they would have united with...
It wasn't Persia, it was on the Russian side, and from there they went by ship to Persia. Now, Dad and my uncle left, but unfortunately they couldn't take their mother with them, so she was left behind.
So your grandmother, your father's mother, would have perished in Siberia?
My dad always thought so, but I have come upon some information that showed that she actually shipped out 3 days after they did, but it didn't tell us where she went. So it could have been maybe she did die and they just put her down as leaving, or she did ship out and we don't know where. But at her age, it was pretty obvious that she probably wouldn't make it long either. When Dad got to Persia, though, he did suffer a little bit because they were malnutrition, suffering from malnutrition. And when they got to eat some healthy food, it wasn't actually suitable to their systems because their systems weren't used to it. So a lot of the people that did get across to Persia suffered from different ailments due to the food. Some even perished, but my dad managed to be okay, and they made it into the army. And actually, there's some pictures in that album that show him when he was in Egypt and stuff like that. He was looking fairly healthy. He put some meat on his bones, and you know, as young men, they got their strength back. So
he was drafted into the roles of General Anders.
And well, it wasn't drafting; it was basically volunteering. Yeah, anything to get out of Russia, and I'm sure that they were happy to do so. I mean, there was a reason to fight.
For sure, there was no homeland at that point.
That's right. Yeah.
So I imagine then not too long after that, your father would have partaken in the very famous Battle of Monte Cassino, because he was then moved into Italy. That's where he probably would have encountered the other enemy, Germans, at that point in time, right?
Correct. He was in Monte Cassino. He was in the artillery, and he was actually the person that aimed the cannon. He was given the coordinates and he would set up the cannon for that. My Uncle Victor at that time was a spotter, so he'd be on the front lines sending instructions to where the shells used to drop. So he was constantly in danger as well, because I mean, he could have caught one of the shells by miscalculation, right? But no, they managed to live through it, and and Italy was quite good to them. Dad used to tell me how they used to help some of the families fish. A grenade or two into the creek, and all the little fish would float up, right? And when they'd float up, they'd throw them into sacks, and then the people, and they would be invited for supper, you see. And he said, "Sprotki," right? Sprotki. Yeah, and he says, "I never ate them like that before. They fried them up whole, and you just ate them that way, tail and all, everything. And he says it was good.
Which is still a delicacy in Italy and in Spain and on the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah.
So, Battle of Monte Cassino, famous battle. Canadians were there, British were there, and New Zealanders were there, and others. And then Poles finally managed to capture the monastery on top of the mountain, which was a strategic location because it was actually blocking the road to Rome, and without that, Rome would have never been liberated.
Correct. Yeah.
So, battle ends, and now we're getting towards the end of World War II. I'm sure there are many subsequent battles that you would have participated in, and then that regiment, if I'm not mistaken, was disbanded, and they ended up all in England, in UK.
Actually, in Scotland.
In Scotland.
Yeah, Glasgow, I believe that was, Glasgow, and then after the Battle of Monte Cassino, and because the battle started going down, Dad was assigned as a driver for one of the officers for a bit. So he'd be driving, like from Bologna, he'd be driving back to Cassino or Rome or whatever. He'd be driving this officer around a little bit. When they went over to Scotland, well, they were disbanded in Italy, but brought over to Scotland. Dad was put on an ambulance where he would be driving patients from Edinburgh or Glasgow to London if they needed more assistance, because that's where all the major medical staff was located.
And how long do you know was he in UK? Was he in Glasgow?
Well, he was there until they came over in 1947. So he was there about a year and a half, I believe.
And applied for immigration status to immigrate to Canada.
Well, Dad was lucky. He had a sister here in Canada that sponsored him and Victor, his brother, into Canada.
So tell me, Henry, how did his sister already arrive to Canada prior to that?
My Aunt Caroline came over, that was in 1923 or 24. And she was sponsored over here as a housekeeper, but actually she came over to marry an ex-neighbor that they had there. His name was Joseph Strokel, Strokel. He was part Czech, and they came over after World War I. They went to the U.S. Into North Dakota, where they didn't find a good livelihood. So they managed to get themselves brought into Canada, or immigrate into Canada from the U.S. around Medicine Hat. It was Schuyler, which was close to the Saskatchewan border. And there they set up a farm. And they farmed there for a while, but towards the beginning of the war, you had the Dust Bowl area, and they were having problems there. And my cousin Frank, who was their the second oldest son, actually would work out off the farm somewhere else to help the family survive, and had a job at a farmer's place around Rosebud, Alberta. And there was a section of land that was for sale there, and he managed to talk his parents into buying it. So they left the farm in Schuyler and came up to Rosebud. And that's where they were living when Dad and Uncle Victor arrived at Rosebud. The only thing there was a hotel, which that's the first thing that's built in a town, a post office, a church, and 2 granaries. And that was it. And they were greeted there on July the 1st, right there at the train station.
So that must have been, I could only imagine, coming from Rome, from Italy, from Glasgow, Edinburgh, London, England, into Rosebud, Alberta. That must have been some culture shock for you.
Oh, yeah. Considering, it's like 3 people and 4 dogs. All joking to the side, but it was quite the welcome. Dad didn't really know my aunt because he was really young when she left.
Yes.
My Uncle Victor did know his sister better. Also, my dad had 2 older brothers here in Canada at the time, Rudolph and Jan. Jan unfortunately passed away before the war started. But Rudolph actually had a company that was cutting lumber around the Edson area. at that time. So when Dad and Victor showed up at the farm, they worked there for a while, and then worked their way up into the lumber camp by Edson.
Okay.
So they worked there for their brother for quite a while. And there's a lot of stories there where Dad managed to save up enough money and buy a truck, which it was a 2-ton, I believe, or a 1-ton. And he was hauling lumber from his brother's sawmill.
So he became a contractor, a subcontractor.
A subcontractor, and he'd be coming back and forth to Edmonton selling this lumber. So that was good for him, and then he met Mom here in Edmonton.
That's what I was about to ask you. I imagine one of those trips to Edmonton must have been very memorable.
Yeah, it was. At that time, there was a restaurant on Jasper Avenue, I think. I'm not quite sure, but Mrs. Schwender worked there. And it just so happened that she was engaged to Mr. Schwender at the time, and they were going out on a date. So Mrs. Schwender, or Miss Godava at the time,
that's right,
actually asked my mom to work at the restaurant. My dad came in for a cup of coffee, and it seemed to go from there, I guess. So that's quite an interesting history. Dad wasn't really a sportsman, but there's only one sport he really enjoyed, and that was wrestling.
Really?
Yeah, so on the first date, he took Mom to Stampede Wrestling at the old Edmonton Gardens, you see.
Oh, what a romantic guy.
Oh, yeah. The romance just flowed from his face. Yeah, but it was quite interesting,
And it's interesting that you mentioned Mr. Schwender, because he also fought at Monte Cassino, and I wonder if they would have had any interactions while in the army still.
Not that I know of. I don't believe so, because Mr. Schwender, I believe, was actually a foot soldier, and he was wounded. And so he would have been taken out, but the artillery had their own job to do, and the foot soldiers had theirs, right? So.
Sure. So maybe let's stop at this point with your dad and switch to your mom. Now, how did she arrive over here? What brought her to that restaurant on Jasper Avenue?
Okay. Well, starting back in Poland, I guess. Her parents, Joseph and Maria Kujo, had a farm close to Przemyśl. Right. And they did the trip to Siberia the same way.
Okay.
Mom was Mom was 10, I believe, at the time, and my aunt Cecile was 8, and they picked them up, and they came into their house, basically put a pistol to my grandfather's head and said, "You're leaving." So there was no ifs, ands, or buts. They got put onto a train and shipped to Siberia. And the same thing. They went through the same thing, and until Anders started the army. They went through starvation and problems. Grandfather was in charge of building new homes for the recent immigrants from Poland. So he was busy. My grandmother was a seamstress, so she was busy, and the kids would always be put in to the food line, and a lot of times my mom said, they had problems because as youngsters, the adults would kind of push you out of the way to get in front of you so they could get more food before you got there. And she did say one time there was a lesson learned when my grandfather was working on the top of a building and seen what happened. He came off of the ladder in a hurry with his hammer. People backed up pretty quick to let him back into line. So he says after that they didn't have much problems. But
sure. Just to illustrate how difficult it must have been, you shared with me your mom gave you what appears to be a poem, but it's sort of also like the 10 Commandments of survival in Siberia. Do you mind if I share this?
Please.
10 przykazań Sybiraków. Pierwsze, przerażone serce w trwodze. Drugie, zamrożone ciała w drodze. Trzecie, ponad siły pracowali. Czwarte, kromkę chleba dostawali. Z wiarą w Bogu umierali. Z wiarą w Boga przeżywali. W tym, co jeszcze dane było, do ojczyzny powróciło. O swym bólu nie mówili. Nam przeżycia powierzyli. W historii rodziców, którą nam przekazywali, na zawsze zostaną w mej pamięci. I to jest podpisane 10 lutego 1940 roku to tydzień tragiczny narodowy. Your mom must have shared a lot of these stories about survival.
She did. She did. I mean, there's so many. I could keep you busy for hours from what I remember. My aunt is still alive, and she would be able to share that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, they lived a hard life. They lived a hard life in those days. And like when they shipped off actually from into the Black Sea to Persia, but they went actually to, I believe, India.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And went through the Indian
refugee camps.
Refugee camps for a while. Then they got shipped off to Africa from India.
Yes.
And their ship got torpedoed as it was coming into close to port there in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But they had, I guess there was no losses. They were lucky that the ship didn't blow up and they managed to get to port. And then she went through, Lusaka, Kiligala, and some other locations there in Africa. And she was in the scouts there. She went to school there. She told stories about monkeys,
mm-hmm.
and the people that lived there. She says were really friendly, and which was nice. They didn't get treated badly.
I understand that Polish refugees were very well received in all those countries. There was a Maharaja in India who was extremely welcoming to Polish community, and same with the African communities.
The Maharaja in India, I believe, adopted 40 children from Siberia. Was it 40 or 43? I'm
mm-hmm.
not quite sure of the number, but he did adopt them and take them under his wing. So, I mean, people had a good heart, and they looked after these poor people that had nothing, that were taken away tragically from their homes and put into locations where they had.
Despite of cultural, racial, and religious differences, they pulled in as a community.
Yeah.
So, what brings your mom to Canada after all this?
When the war ended, my grandfather actually had a job in England. Mm-hmm. And so Mom and my aunt and my grandmother managed to make it to my grandfather, and they started a life there. But at the same time, they were trying to get out of England because it was rough going. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather had a sister that was married and lived in Canada. And they wrote to her, and the family agreed to sponsor them over. So they came over, I believe 1947 or 48, mm-hmm. and from there they went to, it was a little town called Two Hills.
Yes.
Which everyone probably knows. And from there they were there for a couple months, and then my grandfather got himself a job in a coal mine at Mercoal, which is between Edson and Hinton.
Yes.
Yes. And in fact, that's where Mom went, and they went there. There was a hotel there that Mom worked in a restaurant, my aunt worked in a restaurant, and they kind of, Grandpa bought himself a house there, and they were making a living, and eventually the girls had to leave. So Mom found herself a job in Edmonton. She was doing housekeeping mm-hmm. for different people. And so she found herself a room, like room and board in those days. It was a lot different than it is now. And she found herself a job, and she would be working here in Edmonton. And you make friends. Well, the center of everyone, the Polish life, was the church.
That's right.
When no matter where they went to, they graduated to a church. And if it was Polish church, there was all that much better.
That's right. From
that church, they graduated to the Polish Hall, which was the little hall that was on 108th and 108th Avenue, I think, and 96th
Street, 6th or 5th Street,
yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, which is now a Buddhist monastery.
Well, Buddhist monastery. Yeah. I remember going there when I was a child. In fact, Mom and Dad had their wedding
in that hall.
In that hall, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they met in a restaurant, and obviously dated. And how long after do you know the wedding happened?
It was about a year and a half or so. Yeah. And Right now, when they got married, they lived in Edmonton, but the house that they lived on a third story of a walk-up house. Right where the Chinese old age home is, just off of Jasper Avenue there, and about 96th Street, I
So
think.
walking distance to the Polish Hall, too.
Yeah, it was
Cool.
well, yeah, they walked, they did a lot of things. And Dad had his truck, but Mom said, well, if we're going to be married, you're going to have to stay at home. So he actually got himself a job at Alberta Concrete.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and he sold his truck and got a job at Alberta Concrete, and he was working there as a cement mixer. In those days, it wasn't mechanized, so
Sure.
Dad was carrying sacks of cement into the mixer and mixing truckloads, and out it would go, right? And that's, after a while, Dad's back went out on him doing that, but that's another story. But
So when did the babies come along?
I was born Easter Sunday on April the 5th, 1953. My brother was born on in November. Was it that November the 17th? No, 27th. Sorry, 1955. And my sister was born on March the 29th, 1960. So
pretty close in proximity to each other.
Yeah.
So by this time, your parents are pretty well established. The dad has a job.
Yeah.
Mom has a job. They're starting to become active with the Polish community. Did they
pretty well right from the beginning. The Polish community at that time was, everyone relied on each other, and it was so close that they were more like brothers than they were a community.
Yeah.
It was family. It didn't matter what your last name was. If this one neighbor needed help pouring concrete for a sidewalk, everyone went over. If he was building a house and he needed someone to put nails into the lumber, that's where they went. You had people with different trades, like Mr. Mushinsky was an electrician, Frank Liszczynski was a plumber. So we had plumbers, we had electricians in the community, we had truckers that would bring gravel and lumber. All sorts of people went their ways, but they held together, and so basically they stuck together. Right, the church kept them together, their organizations kept them together,
and a sense of nostalgia, missing Poland, same roots, same religion, same culture. They're sort of ostracized, far away from family and home.
Yeah. And so they all knew each other. And excuse me. At that time, it was quite interesting. What I got from it, and I felt it all my life, was that closeness, that need to be part of the community, that need to contribute to the community. I think that's what was the important part, is that if you were there, you had to do something. You're not there for glory. You were there to help. So I remember pouring concrete instead of my dad, because Dad's back was bad, and I was old enough to wheel a wheelbarrow and strong enough and dumb enough to do it, I guess. So away I went, right? And so it was quite interesting. Yeah.
It was the expectation. That was the spirit that you.
But it was an expectation, but it wasn't something anyone questioned. That had to be done. Everyone went and did it.
Perfect.
That's the way they built the Polish Hall. Everyone pitched in. If you didn't have money, you put in your labor. Different people did different things. Dad actually kind of worked with Mr. Mushinsky to put the electrical in. He had other electricians, but Dad, you go nail the boxes in, or you do this, or you run wire, and so everyone had a job, and they did it. And now we got a place that we can probably say it is ours. Yeah. But and it was for the whole community, the whole Polish community.
And it shows. Even today, Henry, when we look at the infrastructure within our Polish community, frankly, most of the buildings, Polish Hall, the old Polish church, but now the new Polish church, the old Polish Hall, even the veterans seniors home, it was built by that generation of your parents, and mostly through volunteering. After work, coming home, having a quick dinner, and then go and volunteer building something for the community. And
if later in life, when they were a little bit more stable, financially stable, they donate to almost anything that was in a Polish community. you know, when the veterans were building their senior center, I remember Dad saying, "We got to get." I said, "But you don't belong to the veterans." "Oh, that doesn't matter. We got to get." Look, let's work together. Let's accomplish something.
Brothers keepers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Polishness obviously extremely important in your home.
Very.
Speaking Polish at home?
Oh yes, yes. In fact, when I was a youngster, just starting to walk, Dad had built a house at that time, and Grandma and Grandpa moved from America into Edmonton because they shut the mine down, and so basically that was the only language I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when anyone asked me what my name was, I would say Henry Lang Polak.
Henry Lang Polak.
That was it. You know, Dad was always joke with me on that, but yeah, and that's the way it was. Once I started school, it was a little different. You start speaking English and stuff like that, so you get getting away from the Polish language. And then, of course, my parents weren't all that fluent in the English language, so you were basically a translator for them for a while. But I remember, I believe it was about 1965, the priest from Holy Rosary came over. His father, it was Father Nagingas, was his name, and he asked my mom if he could talk to me and my brother in the next room for a minute. So I didn't know what it was about. I thought, oh, he wants another altar boy or something. So I said, okay. Well, we went in there, and he sat us down, and he said, you know, you come from a Polish family. And he says, you've got to keep up the Polish language. I would like you to swear to me that when you're in your house with your parents, the only language you're going to speak is Polish. And yeah, I took that to heart, and that's what we did. My Polish was not the best, but you know.
But it is now extremely good. We speak Polish all the time, and feel free to flip into Polish, but you speak Polish fluently.
Ja mogę po polsku rozmawiać, to nie jest kłopot, tylko w ten sposób ja nie byłem pewny siebie, ale z latami więcej udzielam się w Polonii Polskiej, to ja się czuję lepiej, że mogę po polsku coś powiedzieć. Zebrania próbuję po polsku prowadzić, jak coś mi słów brakuje, to w ten sposób po angielsku, ale najwięcej to jest po polsku. Żeby język znać, to musisz praktykować.
Trzeba i myśleć po polsku, łatwiej się mówi.
To jest też interesujące. W 1977 roku pojechałem pierwszy raz do Polski.
O, to jest ciekawe, powiedz.
Z ojcem i z bratem.
O.
I pojechaliśmy tam i po angielsku myślisz i próbujesz po polsku mówić, nie? To się nie udaje. Raz my byliśmy gdzieś tam, 3 tygodnie byliśmy, prawie 5000 kilometrów pojechaliśmy, wszędzie byliśmy w Polsce. Tak. Jechaliśmy z Gliwic do Prudnika, do Opola, Wałbrzych, Wrocław, Łódź, Warszawa, gdzie mogliśmy pojechać i familię odwiedzaliśmy. I raz mnie tak prosto w oczy się uderzyło, mówi, co się dzieje tutaj, ja lepiej po polsku rozmawiam, ale myślę do siebie tak, ale ja po polsku myślę teraz, bo przedtem to było po angielsku. Jak się przewróci z tego, od angielskiego, żeby myśleć po tym języku, to będzie dużo lepiej rozmawiał.
Ale to jest jedno od drugiego uzależnione, bo ciężko myśleć po polsku, jak się dobrze nie mówi po polsku. A więc to akurat był ten moment, gdzie...
Tak mnie złapało, mówię, co się dzieje? Ja teraz ja myślę po polsku, zanim po angielsku. Czasami nawet w domu teraz, to ja lubię po polsku też w swoim domu rozmawiać. Dzieci tego rozumiem. I z Krysią żoną to po polsku rozmawiamy cały czas.
A więc powiedz mi, to był taty też pierwszy raz w Polsce wtedy?
Nie.
On był raz przedtem?
Rok szybszy.
Okej.
Co było? Tata z mamą, my musimy kiedyś do Polski pojechać. Musimy kiedyś do Polski pojechać. I tak rozmowa była, ale nic nie była, akcja jakaś. Rok szybszy to tata i mama obchodzili 25-lecie małżeństwa. Ja w ten czas pracował i też pracował i siostra jeszcze nie, ale co było to, myślę, co im kupić na jaki prezent, nie? Bo ciocia dzwoniła, to wtedy zrobili te 25-lecie tam na sali w domu, dużo ludzi przyszli i tak to oni prezent kupowali, ja myślę, ale od dzieci my coś powinniśmy coś innego kupić. To ja zadzwonił do mojej cioci i mówię, ciocia, chodź za mną, żeby ja jakąś pomyłkę nie zrobił. Pojechaliśmy do pani Lozy i kupiłem im 2 bilety otwarte do Polski.
O, wspaniale.
I siostra i brat do tego się dołączyli, ale my kupiliśmy te bilety i byli otwarte, żeby oni datę ustalili. To na uroczystości, na tym bankiecie, co tam robiliśmy dla rodziców, ja mówię, że mam prezentację, przyszedł do mikrofonu i dał im te 2 torby takie lotnicze, co wtedy dostawali.
Tak.
I mówi, tutaj wasze prezenty, a tata się patrzy, mówi, na co nam te torby? Ja mówię, to nie te torby, tylko co w środku. A tata mówi, co tam jest? Ja mówię, bilety do Polski. Wy tylko musicie sobie urlop załatwić i jechać.
Jaka reakcja?
Była od ludzi i od rodziców.
Na pewno. I jakie ich było wrażenie po raz pierwszy w Polsce? Bo to zupełnie inna Polska, komunistyczna.
Wiesz, tam Orbis musiałeś płacić, tam coś $5 na dzień musiałeś im płacić, oni tam złotówkę tobie płacili, gdzie mogłeś pójść tam na ulicy i lepsze cenę dostać, nie? Ale no, musieli tego zapłacić. Byli ciekawi, ale co załatwili im też, to był tour w Polsce, żeby...
Wycieczkę.
Tak, wycieczkę, bo tam, gdzie moja mama była w Polsce, to już było pod Rosją, gdzie tata pod Rosją, to nie mogli tam wrócić.
Tak jest.
To była wycieczka na tydzień czasu. I oni pojechali tą wycieczkę i później potem odwiedzali tu, tam, a później do familii. Ojciec miał brata tam, Ludwik, co w Prudniku mieszkał w ten czas. I poszli jego odwiedzić, byli w Leżańsku, byli w Warszawie, byli w Wałbrzychu i w takich miejscach. Zielona Góra, też pojeździli familii odwiedzić i wrócili do domu, byli bardzo zadowoleni.
A powiedz mi, jaka była Twoja reakcja? Ty się urodziłeś w Kanadzie. Polska to jest miejsce, o którym mama i tata mówią, ale obce miejsce. Jakie były Twoje wrażenia?
Ja się czuję wolny, nie? Jak ja tam pojechałem, tam na lotnisku widzieć wojsko, mają karabiny maszynowe, nie? I tam patrzę się na nich, ale nic tobie tam nie mówią, w kolejkach stoisz, musiałeś tutaj paszporty pokazać, idziesz przez celnika, jak wchodzisz, jak dużo pieniędzy masz z sobą, czego przyjechaliście do Polski, tak jakby co to obraza jest, żeby przyjechać albo coś, no. Tak. Chciałem się dowiedzieć, skąd moi rodzice, jaka to kultura, nie? To my też sobie dobrze pojeździliśmy, dużo zdjęcia braliśmy, ciekawe było Oświęcim, wiesz, tam to człowiek naprawdę się...
Zmienia to człowieka.
Bardzo, bardzo. Żeby ktoś, jakaś osoba obca by mogła coś dla ludzi, takich rzeczy zrobić, nie wchodzi do myślenia. Ja myślę, to jest też kłopot z ludźmi teraz, że nie mogą obrazić, że ktoś mógł tego zrobić, to nie wierzą tego.
I że to się może stać ponownie.
I to może. I się działało. W Rwanda i w takich miejscach to się działało. Ale odchodzę od tematu. No, dobrze się czuliśmy. Tata nas pilnował tak jak wojskowy, like a sentry, army sentry. Tak. No, na wesele nie idziecie, bo tam nozami się biją. No, na zabawę nie idziesz, bo to też będzie bitwa, wiesz. Tak. Ja mówię, tata, jak chce się bić, to będzie się bił, jak nie chce się bić, to nie będzie się bił. Ale to tak. I próbował kontrolować nasze pieniądze, tak, nie? Tak. Bo tata mówi tak, stójcie tutaj chłopaki, jak my tylko przyjechali, nie? Ja pójdę tam dostać nasze pieniądze z Orbisu, nie? Żeby mieliśmy to złotówkę. Dajcie mi paszporty, to paszport na co będę, nie? Kłócił się z ojcem, że ja sam pójdę, no poszedł, załatwił, ale żeby nam złotówkę dać, absolutnie nie. Paszporty oddał, ale pieniądze nie. I tak, żeby my może żeby nic. Ale to nic, to jak się spotyka z kozynami, jak się da 20, to w drugiej kieszeni coś innego się znajdzie.
Oczywiście.
I to my zjeliśmy.
To było strasznie dużo pieniędzy kiedyś, $10.
Ja. Się nauczyłem w kolejce w PKO stać, bo dziennie pojechaliśmy, to trzeba wódki komuś kupić, nie? To zawsze tam wódka tu, wódka tam, to a gdzie kupić? Tylko w PKO albo w Peweksie, nie? I tak, tutaj idź, kartkę wypełnij. Z tą kartką idź tam i zapłać, a później jak zapłacisz, to idziesz tam dostać, nie? Dobrze, że nas trójka była. To jeden tutaj poseł zamówił, tutaj drugi zapłacił, a trzeci odbierał. To przez tą kolejkę to szybko szło, nie?
Się system rozpracowali. Wspaniale. No i oczywiście po kilku latach pobrałeś się z Polką. Twoja żona jest Polką, więc podtrzymujesz tą kulturę.
Tak. Krysia przyjechała tutaj w 78 roku na wizytę. I my się tutaj spotkali, ale musiała wrócić, ale my pisali tam i z powrotem. I ona parę dni przed stanem wojennym miała, w sensie, że wyjechała z Polski do brata w Chicago. I dała mi znać, że ona tam jest. To jak ja się dowiedział, to na samolot i do Chicago.
To ty ją naprawdę lubiałeś.
O ja. I to pojechałem drugi raz, to my się uzenili.
W Chicago?
W Chicago. Just by the Justice of the Peace.
Tak.
A później przyjechałem do domu, to mama już wesele planuje. O ja, na drugi miesiąc robimy tutaj wesele. Ja mówię, mama, ja jeszcze papiery na emigracji nie składam, jak to będzie, nie? Przepraszam. I to w styczniu Krysia przyjechała. Jak przyjechała, to wtedy my w kościele tutaj Świętego Rodzańca braliśmy ślub kościelny i u weteranów mieliśmy wesele i Spektrum grał u nas na weselu, ale było wspaniały czas, dobry czas mieliśmy.
I skąd żona z Polski pochodzi?
Leżańska.
Z Leżańska?
Ja, tam gdzie najlepsze piwo.
Najlepsze powiedzieć, ja od razu o piwie myślę. I wychowaliście dzieci też w polskim duchu, prawda?
Tak. Córka Jessica, ona tutaj do uniwersytetu chodziła, to była na kursie polskim, była nawet prezeską the Polish Culture Club at University Club. Była w Polsce w Kulu.
Na uniwersytecie?
Na uniwersytecie i tam parę razy sama pojechała do Polski. A najstarszy syn, Krzysiu, to on też był sporo razy w Polsce. Pojechał z kolegami i rentowali miejsce w Krakowie na miesiąc czasu, ale był tam 2 miesiące. To on z kolegami tam sobie w Krakowie mieli takie jak króle tam żyli. Na rynku, gdzie jedzenie jest bardzo drogie, to tam nigdy, ale znaleźli małe restaurację taką, gdzie mogli sobie tanio jedzenie kupić.
Bar mleczny może.
To było chłopcy
tak.
z kartoflą i z kapustą, nie? Codziennie to jedli. Ale mówi to za 10 zł, mówi to za darmo nam dają. To oni mówią,
więcej pieniędzy na piwo mieli.
Na piwo i na inne rzeczy, nie wiadomo co, ale tam chodzili koło rzeki i tam wszędzie byli w Krakowie. Później się rozdzielili, a w tym samym roku to Jessica była na Kulu, to Krzysiu pojechał z nią się spotkać u babci w Leżańsku. A najmłodszy syn też do nich dojechał w ten czas i oni stamtąd jechali sobie trochę po Polsce, w Warszawie i co oni tam nie wyrabiali. W Niemiec byli, w Holandii też wyjechali, bo kuzyn ich zabrał samochodem, pojechali sobie i wrócili.
To też się czują Polakami. Mają
Polakami i próbują też się udzielić. Jessica oczywiście to dali po polsku pisy i czyta i rozmawia. Brała udział na duzynkach i takich rzeczy. Ja jestem bardzo wdzięczny za moje dzieci, też ten język próbują utrzymać.
Ale dumny z nich jesteś na pewno.
No, na pewno. Ja.
I tata do niedawna był na pewno z tego bardzo dumny.
O, bardzo, bardzo.
Ja. Powiedz mi trochę o twojej działalności w Polonii, bo byłeś w harcerstwie, prawda? Udzielałeś się w harcerstwie, byłeś harcerzem?
O, byłem. Moja działalność zaczęła się od przedszkola w Polskiej Szkole Soboty. To było na starej weterańskiej sali, to było na 96 ulicy. I tam to chodziłem do polskiej szkoły, zawsze do polskiego kościoła. Jak zabawa była, to rodzice mnie nie zostawiali w domu. Ja koło tatka Borowieckiego stał i nogą tuptał, jak on grał na weselach i na zabawach. Ale to druga historia, później od niego się uczyłem akordeon, nie?
Ograłeś akordeon?
O ja, może 6-7 lat brałem lekcje, ja. Ale z tego to zawsze pod kościołem, to z księdzami, to było nauka na pierwszej komunii, na bizmowanie i takie rzeczy. Chrzest brałem w starym polskim kościele. Ja, to był, jeszcze był. Ja.
A komunia już w nowym na pewno?
W nowym, ja.
I w harcerstwie
byłem, ja.
Na obozy jeździłeś?
Tak, byłem wolontarią tak samo w 66 na zlocie, na Millennium Polski, nie?
Tak jest.
Tam byłem i później dalej należałem potem w Edmontonie i inne rzeczy zaczęli grać większą rolę, nie? Ale cały czas to jak w kościele, w domu polskim to zawsze coś było. Na zabawę to my zawsze chodzili.
Dom Polski to był takie centrum dla Polonii. Tam się młodzi ludzie poznawali, prawda, tam się spotykali. To było takie naprawdę centrum kultury naszej.
Dom Polski, to balkon należał do młodzieżów, a podłoga do rodziców. Ale my po tych schodach ganiali na tych zabawach. Tam i z powrotem zawsze do góry, na dół, wiesz. Bawiliśmy się bardzo dużo, tylko jakaś zabawa była, to my tam byli. Młodzież tam było, setkami tam chodziło.
To był taki prawdziwy dom, tam się
jak młody był, dlatego też muszę powiedzieć, jak miałem 13 lat, to pani Buzka prowadziła grupę tańcerną, to w tym też byłem. Maryla Hasek, jak poznasz, tam Zenek Bereźnicki, takich wszystkich te młode ludzie tam byli i my się uczyli tańczyć od nich. Ona zawsze mówiła, czego tak prosto chodzisz? Ktoś tobie tam patyk sadził gdzieś? Można tego obciąć z tego.
Jak tym tańcem teraz? Pamiętasz jeszcze coś z tego wszystkiego?
Poloneza dużo tańczyliśmy. I nawet potem, jak ona przestała uczyć, to inne przebrali. My tańczyliśmy dużo razy w domu polskim. Poloneza na początku jakąś zabawy albo bankietu jakiegoś.
Taki formalny taniec na rozpoczęcie.
Tak, zawsze to było.
Powiedz mi, a więc ty tą historię naszej Polonii tutaj znasz wspaniale, można powiedzieć o takich sprawie początków. No i ten Dom Polski to dla Ciebie takim drugim domem był, bo tam spędzałeś tyle czasu. A teraz jesteś jednym z 3 prezesów, który prowadzi Dom Polski. A powiedz mi, jaką widzisz przyszłość dla Twoich dzieci, dla Twoich wnuków i przyszłość dla Domu Polskiego i dla naszej Polonii. Jak widzisz, to się będzie rozwijać i jakbyś chciał, żeby to się rozwijało w przyszłości?
Jakby chciałem, to ja bym chciał, żeby wszystkim młodzież do Domu Polskiego jakoś się dostosowali się, żeby przyszli do nas, do jakiejś organizacji się zapisali, żeby mogli później tego przebrać od nas. I ja myślę, że to się da radę. Ja zawsze proponuję, że pokój SPK jest otwarty dla wszystkich. Jak ktoś potrzebuje miejsca, jak są zebrani, żeby ze mną się skontaktować i ja coś będę próbował im pomóc jak najwięcej. Bo dużo tych młodzież to się spotyka, ale nie mają gdzie. Nie. Ja bym chciał im to dać. Ja myślę, że będzie to miejsce wolne do nich, tylko muszą się spytać. Muszą się spytać, ja chętnie wszystkim pomogę. jak długo jestem prezesem SPK, ale zobaczymy jak dalej pójdzie. Teraz po naszej organizacji, czy to jest Towarzystwo Polsko-Kanadyjskie, czy SPK, czy weterani, to po trochę się wykluczymy, jak nie będziemy ściągać tą młodzież do naszych szeregów.
Czy macie jakieś pomysły, jak ściągać tą młodzież?
To jest kłopot.
To jest trudne wyzwanie.
Mój pomysł jest, żeby im dać coś do roboty.
Jakiś projekt.
Projekt. Jak ludzie pracują na projekcie, to oni są zadowoleni. Nie potrzebują pieniędzy za to, tylko mają chęć coś robić. Wszystkich ludzi mają tę chęć, żeby coś zrobić, coś wykonać. Jak my daliśmy im coś do roboty, taką, że nie musi nam nawet pomagać, żeby ich zachęcić, żeby
coś swojego stworzyli.
Yeah.
Bo tak jak wspominałeś, to budowanie tej polskiej hali, budowanie kościoła, to trzymało ludzi razem, bo każdy miał jakiś wkład, prawda?
Tak jest. Yeah.
A teraz może po prostu nie ma takich projektów, które by przyciągały.
Możemy wrócić na temat kasynu i jak to zepsuło, ale ja nie chcę tego wspominać, bo wszystkich korzystamy z tych kasynów, ale to z drugiej strony to nas psuje. Bo wszystkie przyjdą na jeden dzień co 2 lata i spodziewają, że te pieniądze ich są i będą spędzać na tego, co oni są. I to nieprawda, bo jak tutaj w prowincji, to oni tobie, Alberta Gaming tobie mówi, co masz
dyktuje,
robić.
Co możesz, a co nie
co
możesz.
Dyktuje, tak. I z tego względu ja myślę, musimy wrócić do tych starych czasach, że wszyscy pracują na jakiś cel. Czy tam są pieniądze z tym włączone, bo nie, to nie obchodzi. Ale co trzeba, żeby ludzie mieli projekt, żeby się czuli, jak coś dla nich należy, że coś wykonali, że ten dom polski dla nich należy.
Jesteś małą częścią czegoś większego, prawda?
To, co jest, że pracuję z innymi, żeby coś wykonać, żeby wszyscy mieli coś. Jak ja prowadzę dom polski albo coś, to ja się nie patrzę, że to SPK prowadzi, ja się patrzę, że ja tam pracuję dla tej organizacji, że jak oni coś dostaną, to my też skorzystamy, ale to wszyscy muszą skorzystać, nie tylko jedna organizacja. Ja nie jestem tam na zarobek jednej organizacji.
No, oczywiście.
SPK, Combatanci, to my mamy swoje projekty, my musimy utrzymać tą historię polską, co obchodzi tych żołnierzy, co tą organizację stworzyli. Te bitwy, co oni przeszli, te rzeczy, żeby nikt tego nie zapomniał, co oni przeżyli, tak jak przez Sybir, co się działo w 1939 roku, jak Niemcy wjechali, jak Ruscy z drugiej strony wjechali, jak ludzie ginęli i za co i po co. To musimy pamiętać, bo jak tego zapomniemy, to my naszą kulturę gubimy i historię polską gubimy.
Oczywiście. To jest duże zadanie. Duże zadanie. Masz jakieś plany pojechania do Polski niedługo? Po pandemii oczywiście?
Wiesz, ja bym chętnie pojechał. Ja bym chciał tam znowu familii odwiedzić. Bo my mamy sporo, tam dużo mamy familii. Wszystkich nie znam, ale ja bym chciał ich zapoznać. Teraz na emeryturze jestem, to mam czas i bym chętnie pojechał sobie. Ale zobaczymy, to ta pandemia nas teraz trochę zamknęła w domu i musimy na to uważać. Jak to się skończy, to gdzie bądź, żeby pojechać.
Żeby tylko wyjechać, prawda?
Tak.
Henry, czy jest coś jeszcze, z czym byś chciał się podzielić? Czy ja zapomniałem może coś się zapytać Ciebie?
Nieco ja teraz mogę pomyśleć, myślę na ten temat. No, ja myślę, dobra rozmowa była. Ja nie myślę, ja coś zapomniałem. Można zawsze dodać do historii, bo tam zawsze coś małego się zapominać i wspomnieć. Ale ja myślę, tutaj ta Polonia jest wspaniała.
Zgadzam się.
Ja nie wiem, więcej inne narodowości mają taką wspaniałą community, jak się mówi. Bo tutaj mogą się kłócić dzisiaj, a jutro będzie jeden drugiemu pomagał. I to naprawdę można powiedzieć, że to jest coś dobrego.
I to trzeba podtrzymywać, prawda?
Tego trzeba utrzymać.
Masz naprawdę wspaniałą historię twojej rodziny.
Dziękuję.
I to, że do dzisiaj ty to wykonujesz jeszcze, to jest wspaniałe. Henry, w imieniu pani Faćko, naszej prezes organizacji, chciałbym ci podziękować za 16 lat, co żeście razem wspólnie spędzili pracując w organizacjach, za twój poświęcony czas, bo strasznie dużo prywatnego czasu w to wkładasz. To jest coś, co nie jesteś z rodziną, nie jesteś z dziećmi, nie jesteś żoną, ale udzielasz się w Polonii, więc za twoje zaangażowanie, za wytrwałość, bo nieraz, tak jak mówisz, nie jest łatwo, ale jesteś wytrwały, no i za zaufanie, że nam zaufałeś, przekazać twoją historię rodziny i że jesteś dla nas taki życzliwy i za twoje bardzo dobre słowa. A więc bardzo ci jestem wdzięczny za to. My opublikujemy twoją historię twojej rodziny, bo wydaje mi się, że przyszłe pokolenia, nasze dzieci, twoje, moje, nasi wnukowie muszą wiedzieć, skąd pochodzą, jak to ugrupowanie polonijne tutaj powstało, dlaczego jest dom na Kingsway Avenue, na którym pisze polski dom i kto go postawił, dlaczego, co się w nim kiedyś działo. To są ważne rzeczy, które musimy przekazywać. Dziękuję ci bardzo.
I dziękuję, że mogłem taki miły czas z wami spędzić.